Yes, believe it or not, today's episode we're going to be talking about the Marvel problem. So start those disliking calling me a DC fanboy since there's a lot of flip-flopping.
I don't have a theme song, so this is a placeholder.
No. This is something I've been really wanting to talk about for a while, and now that Ant-Man is out and we've seen how that turns out, I figure it's a good time as any to really get into it. So on this episode of Ask Armin Some BS, we are going to cover that. Now, a bunch of you asked me, so once again, I can't display it here, but you wanted me to talk about, does Marvel have a problem with its villains and its approach to villains? And I'm going to kind of go throughout the history of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and really try to define what I think about that. Now, obviously, we started off with Iron Man 1, and I think Obadiah Stane was actually a pretty decent villain for what they had. Of course, the problem you run into with the first movie in a series is that you have to lay the foundation of the main character. He's the most important. He's the villain, or he's the hero in the title, and the villain is the reason he gets there. You really can't spend too much time developing the villain because then the hero gets shafted out of his own movie. And that's a huge problem. So of course, when we break it down to simplicity, if we go back and look at Captain America, the First Avenger, that is my personal favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, and I know that's most people's in the middle or on the bottom. I love it because it's so focused on Steve Rogers. Red Skull being one of my favorite villains of all time, completely gets shafted in that movie. He really doesn't have a big role. But then again, when you think about the Red Skull and what he is just a villain. He's really not this deep philosophical character. He's not like Dr. Doom or something. He doesn't have sympathetic qualities. He's a psychopath who wants to eradicate humans. Where you look at Dr. Doom, and he's a sympathetic villain who got to that point by thinking what he was doing was good. So there's this big difference. So when we look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, most recently I am going to talk about, of course, Ant-Man. When you look at Yellow Jacket, Darren Cross in there, he is a little bit of a weaker villain. And the reason for that is that they are taking their time developing Scott Lang, who is going to be a huge player in the future of these movies. You look at what they're saying, he's going to be big in Civil War, no pun intended, he might even be Giant Man in that one. So they have to get that rolling. So are you going to waste 20, 30 minutes of the movie developing the villain who's a one and done, or are you going to, develop the hero even more and his supporting cast that's going to show up in the future and kind of sideline the villain? Which is another reason why a lot of people say, well, how come Loki was the only good one? Because their end game was to have Loki show up in Thor, get developed, come back in Avengers, come back in Thor: The Dark World, and be a consistent villain down the road because they wanted that character to actually be a viable villain. And then I know I have to bring it up. Of course, there is Daredevil and Kingpin. Daredevil, the show is great. Obviously, probably one of the best things the MCU, probably one of the best things in comics, honestly, ever. That show is just spectacular. You look at the critic reviews, you look at the feedback from the fans and everybody. It's across the board. It's a 9 out of 10 or a perfect score for most people. So when you look at that, you really have to break that show down. Why is it that Kingpin is the best villain that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has and one of the best villains in comics ever? And you have to look at the timestamp. They had 13 hours to tell a great story, and they literally devoted about 3 to 4 hours of that on fleshing out Kingpin. Now, when you compare 10 minutes of a villain in a movie to 4 hours of Daredevil, it's about the same when you really think about it. It's one has only 2 hours to tell the story, one has 13 hours to tell the story. So let's take 20% of that and devote it to the villain's screen time. Let's take 20% and devote it to the villain's screen time. They're both the same, yet they're both so different because one has to get priority. The movie has to do the hero because the villain isn't coming back. Now maybe they're going to do a Masters of Evil or something like that, which there seems to be no indicator. I think that's why a lot of people are pissed. But then again, let's not forget that they do have the Infinity Gauntlet and the Infinity Stones. So at some point, they could rewrite some of the history, much like Days of Future Past and X-Men did, and say that some of these villains did stay alive. So there's always this weird, comic effect that we could do with these movies. So overall, I think my feelings are that the heroes are being developed, the villains aren't, and there's a good reason. It sucks, I know it sucks, and I'm really pissed because we could be getting much better villains. Malekith in Thor: The Dark World was a complete piece of crap. That was just awful. And we learned that the reason that that character had about 15 minutes of screen time cut out in his backstory was so they could work in Tom Hiddleston's Loki for more of a bigger role. So when you look at it like that, you know, in the end, I think the better heroes outweigh the generic villains because they're just there to set up the hero. So that's just my take on it. I want you guys to let me know your take on this down below.
So thank you for watching the video, and if you guys like what you saw, don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you haven't already, check out some of these other great videos we have on the channel. Just click the annotation right there, it'll take you to them. Thank you for watching, guys, and have a good one.